All right, welcome to the Life and Recovery Podcast. My name is Mark. Um, this is
Marcus.
you are.
Elise, hi.
Louise. Right. So, uh, Life and Recovery Podcast is a conversation about how do you live life in recovery. Um, if this is valuable to you or you found this useful, please feel free to share it with others. You can find it at Choice Recovery Path on YouTube or your favorite streaming service. And so, how do you live life differently at any stage of recovery? So, what we were talking about recently is, a few different topics. We talked about loss, we talked about insecurity, um, accomplishing our goals, coming at things from different perspectives. And recently, Elise and I were having this conversation about, you know, right sizing the space we take up in the room. So, what that kind of means is if you ever met, you know, anybody who is just the biggest personality in the room, they've got to take up all the space. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
absolutely. Yeah.
Or, or basically it's something driven by their ego, like, oh, they've got to be the biggest, loudest voice in the room. Or on the other end of that spectrum, somebody who just doesn't want to take up any space. They're small and mousy. Oh, they're constantly apologizing for even existing. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we were trying to think about is where does this come from? How do we end up in this place where we're either, too big for our britches, as they say, or I feel small and insignificant. And I'm sure there's other versions of this, perfectionism, some other things. We get into that in a little bit later. But where does this all come from? Is that essentially what you remember us talking about, Elise?
Yeah. Yeah, where does these type of personalities that maybe obviously aren't authentic or aren't it's almost like sort of like wearing a mask in the world. It's not it, you can't connect really to people when you're one or the other. So it's sort of problematic whether, we realize it or not.
How do you be more of your true authentic self if so let's define, like, how did we actually get here to begin with?
Hmm.
You ever found yourself on one side of the spectrum or the other?
Yeah.
Okay. So how did we actually get here? Like, I think a lot of things we do unconsciously because it's satisfying something we need, down deep. But how did we end up getting here? So, you can look at somebody on one side of the spectrum who's kind of like very mousy or very small, or making themselves insignificant in the world, or somebody who's on the other end where my ego drives everything I do, and I'm big, and I'm this big personality. But behind both of those, or like a bully, what we're thinking about is it basically comes down to a lot of insecurity. Make sense?
Yeah.
Like if I have to be the biggest personality in the world, or if I have to be little and insignificant, or if, like, I'm a bully, most times that comes from, a big, amount of insecurity. Does that make sense so far? So
Hmm.
if my insecurity is driving those actions, and I guess the most logical step is what's behind that insecurity.
Hmm.
You know, insecurity, I think most times is, or at least and I were talking about this, is based on some sort of fear, like what I'm afraid of, you know, and that fear, because fear doesn't, and people may debate this, by the way, it's just an opinion. Fear doesn't come from, that doesn't come on its own. Like, I'm not just afraid to be afraid. It's always a reaction to an experience, something that happened. Okay. So basically the experiences that I've had in my life end up, if I fast forward, creating that fear. That fear creates insecurity. That insecurity creates one of these ways that I deal with that insecurity. And that becomes who I am in the world. Make sense?
Yeah.
So, Alicia, we're just talking about an experience that made that. So, for
Mhm.
example, what were you explain that again? How you're saying that, like if somebody, you know, gets beat up.
Yeah. Well, when I hear the word insecurity, I think like not secure, like not safe. And when you don't feel safe, it's like you are afraid. And so I'm thinking like insecurity is sort of this like general thing people are walking around with. Whereas like when we think of what am I afraid of, like it's probably some specific things, probably based on past experiences. Um, you know, for me, I think of like when you're talking about the small, I'm sorry for existing. It was so funny. The other day I was like reading this like group text with my cousins and literally like everyone in it said sorry like at least twice for like it like that what we were talking about like saying sorry for existing kind of thing. I was like, "Oh my God, I'm in a family of people pleasers." Um which to me is sort of that like small like apologizing for everything. And uh and I would say like I was not born that way. In fact, my mom told me I was a pretty brave kid. And so, like you're saying, like, where does that come from? Like, in my opinion, it was over time of experiences that caused fear. So, like, first of all, like the big one for me is like my dad leaving when I was 13. There was fear of, um, first of all, I didn't see that coming whatsoever. And so there was fear of like, you never really know somebody. It doesn't matter how long they're in your life, they could leave you. And so there was fear of abandonment. And then, that made me want to be small in the world. So then I go off to high school and I'm trying to be small in the world. And, I am not wanting to reach out and connect to people because I don't trust them. Right. And so my fear continues of like, oh, if someone tries to be my friend, like I don't trust you. And then so every time a friendship happened and then it didn't work out, it just like it was another fear of abandonment, you know. Then romantic relationships, same pattern for me. Um, some sort of abandonment. And so there's all these like little events that have created the fear. And then in general, like decades later, it's just this blanket of insecurity that I don't even see as that. I just see myself as the people pleaser, right? The person who has to be small and a doormat everywhere I go. It's like all those little fears built this blanket of insecurity, which created my personality. So much so that I didn't even realize that's not truly who I am.
Yeah. In every single experience along the way, and then, well, so you talked about like, divorce happened. I felt alone. I can't believe somebody abandoned me. That hurt really fucking bad. So now I'm going to avoid allowing that to happen again. And every relationship I've got into since, I'm actually looking for that to happen because, the part of me that says I don't want to feel that shit again is seeking out avoiding that pain. And so I avoid, and then I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop the whole time in every single relationship I've been in. And now that looking for that to happen actually ends up hurting the relationship itself. Because I'm not saying that like people won't hurt or leave us, but the perspective I bring into all of this, that if I'm looking for something bad to happen, I'm probably going to find it, you know?
Yeah, that subconscious search. I mean, because I think I also sought out people who I knew I could abandon. Like I sought out people that like needed me or I knew they were going to fuck me over so that like when it ended it wasn't a surprise.
Yeah. So that, yeah, there's one side of that, you know, or, have you ever been in a relationship where I always felt it was better to be the one that left, but better than be the one that got left.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if you were to now, that could bring up, I'm starting to think that there's all sorts of manifestations of this same end result, you know, victim where everything's always bad, or, like a perfectionist. This was
Mm-hmm.
my father to a T, where like everything on the outside looked fantastic. His pants were always dry cleaned, he had a shiny Cadillac, the house looked immaculate, everything on the outside looked great, you know. But the goal of that is basically to put myself so beyond judgment that you don't see into who I really feel I am. You know, when my outsides look perfect, but my insides feel like shit. So let me ask you, Nick, if you're willing to get
Yeah.
into this, is like which side of that spectrum did you start out with? Were you kind of more of a bigger personality or more the other side?
Bigger person than what?
A bigger personality. Like we were talking about the person who's very, you know,
I was more of the insecure person.
more the insecurity.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So that insecurity made you show up in the world how?
Fearful, I guess, and I had like a very fearful and I don't know how to say that word, but my confidence, I lacked
Yeah.
confidence in
Okay.
everything, and low self-esteem, I
Okay.
guess you could say.
Did you overcompensate for that in any way?
Today?
Well, like when you were, I mean, obviously we're talking about recovery. I mean, how you
Mm,
show up today is very different than probably how you used to show up.
yeah.
But like you talked about insecurity and overconfidence, did that basically drive how you showed up in the world? We like some people that are like, you ever met a bully?
Yeah.
If you think about why they're a bully, what do you think it is? That they're just mean or nasty?
Because they probably went through something in their
Yeah.
life.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
went through something really, exactly, really fucking hard.
Yeah.
So how did you show up in the world as a result of that insecurity?
I was driven by fear, I guess you could say, ever since my drug addiction, it led me to stay insecure my whole life, and I didn't ever want to be a part of people's the groups or connect with people, which today, I find that to be wrong, and that I do want to connect with people and I do want to live life, to the fullest that I can and be part of something but I ruined a lot of that with my drug addiction, and
Okay, so addiction, actually, I never thought about that either. You're making a really good point. Is that a manifestation of insecurity is addiction? It's that, I need to be, I always think about it like social lubricant, like how you go to the bar to feel more confident, or you drink to feel more one way, or at least you always talked about drink or using or drinking to feel any other way.
Yeah, controlling it.
You're controlling how I felt in the world, depending on what I used.
Yeah.
Be more confident, do some blow or drink. If I want to be more reserved, oh, pills or, utilizing some version of something to supplement my personality.
Mm-hmm.
So if using was a manifestation of insecurity, behind that insecurity, you know, is something that I'm afraid of. Like what was behind, like what were you afraid or thought
like
about?
like like she was stating, like abandonment,
Yeah.
that was one thing that really got me. And I guess like the low self-esteem, that I could have got overweight and that I wasn't accepted, and the deny I guess rejection, denial.
Okay. Yeah. So looking at, the what caused all of these things, when we go back, really get behind all this, it drove all of the actions in front of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I mean, like you talked about, at least like putting this blanket on of all of our experiences over time, unconsciously end up creating this veil or this personality that we just accept. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm an extrovert or I'm an introvert. you know, okay. I mean, I'm not saying there's not science behind it to say people are one or the other, but are we one or the other as a result of our experiences that came before it? You know?
Right. Um, And sometimes I think that it's so hard to identify if we've been behaving that way for so long or if we've had traumatic experiences at a young age. Something that stood out to me when I was writing on my second step recently, it was talking about restoration to sanity, and I was thinking about the restore, like that's saying at some point I was sane. Now I became insane, and now I'm restoring to sanity. And I was like, when the fuck was I ever sane?
Yeah.
And so I had to like do this deep dive back and realize like, okay, well, when was I sort of just authentically me at like, I don't know, a toddler or whatever. The times when my mom said, "Oh yeah, you were so brave and confident and blah blah blah." Like, and that me happened before all these things, you know, and then time wore that down or wore it away by different experiences. And like, people talk about addiction as like but like disease, but it's dis-ease, which to me is insecurity. Like we have a sense of like uneasiness, and the addiction is always a way to try and satisfy that, like that, um, what I have is not enough, or some sort of hole or void in me that needs to be filled by something. And I found that to be true in my recovery as well. I just with other things. I do that with people, with love, with relationships of like something in here is not secure. It's uneasy. Um, and so I'm outwardly seeking to fill that void. And that's not who I was when I was 5 years old, you know?
Mhm. So basically, yeah, that we're a byproduct of, I mean, because it's true, like you don't necessarily, you don't see the experience. You see them all as individual one-off things that happened. I lost somebody. Oh, my dad kicked my ass that one day, you know, but all of these, probably a pattern of things that have happened over a long period of time. You know, I got, if we were to keep reverse engineering this idea back to when we were, I mean, that's a good question. When are we our authentic selves? Do we come out of the gate just being who we are? And then life happens and experiences show up and jaded shit happens. And I react to, I think most people, that if you look at you've heard of the ACEs scores,
The aces.
the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences thing. So to just the simple version of this is they did a study, I think it was in the 90s. Now, please go out and do your own research on this idea. But ACEs stands for adverse childhood experiences. So they had this series of questions towards, I think it was 10 or 12 questions where they would ask a series of things about what happened in your early life. And the more you said yes to some of these questions, the more at risk you were for high risk behavior, sexually acting out, drug use, a lot of things like that.
Okay.
And so why I'm looking at that is, I think a lot of people had really hard shit happen to us at really young ages.
Yeah.
Could be a loss of a parent, could be a loss losing somebody to incarceration, could be growing up in extreme poverty, growing up with an extreme amount of violence, growing up with abuse, neglect, hurt, pain, whatever it is. Each of us could probably pick something from our past that would fit in that category, right?
Yeah.
So we learn how to deal with our life at the time with the skills we have at that time, which is generally, I mean, I don't know. I remember, being sexually assaulted at a very young age, 8 or 9 years old. And so you deal with the life the best way an 8 or 9 year old could to deal with those things. Well, the thing is, we have a tool in the book called Victim or Victimized, which is kind of this idea, but it's like, so you can think in your old head of something that happened pretty traumatically when you were a kid, right?
Of course.
Okay, so can you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we can think of that thing, and then we can think of how we reacted at the time, which was probably the best we could at that time. When you're 5, 7, 10, 12, 15, even, 20, you're still basically a kid. So you do the best you can at the time to react in a way that keeps you safe. But a lot of times, well, I don't want to make a blanket statement, but a lot of times the event that caused me to react that way stopped. But the traits that I used to deal with that situation stuck with me. For example, when I was sexually assaulted when I was a kid, I got really good at one thing, checking out, like mentally detaching from the situation. Something was happening. I don't want to be here. This sucks. I'm not here. I imagined I was somewhere else. To this day, I can still do that if I'm not conscious of it. I can mentally check the fuck out of anywhere. That's a really common addict scenario. So, you know, Elise, can you think of an example of a way you dealt with something when you were a kid?
Yeah, I
Or
think
the
my biggest
situation
one
that
is
you
my
dealt
dad
with?
leaving.
Okay. So your dad leaving. So at how old was this?
13.
But 13. How did you deal with that?
Yeah, I was just like, fuck people. And I was like an angry, reserved bitch who only cared about non-people things, such as like my hobbies and school.
Okay. So I only need to deal with what affects me. And then usually probably look at why that is, because then I'm safe. Then I only have me to rely on, or only I can hurt myself, and I won't do that. So let me just focus on me. Okay.
Hmm.
Thinking into your past, what was something that happened to you that was pretty traumatic when you were a kid?
Well, at 13, my mom, she was dying in bed of diabetes,
Hmm.
and that was pretty horrible to watch. And my brother suffered from bipolar schizophrenic disease, and he would drink, and it was a pretty traumatizing period in my life at the age of 13 as well,
Yeah.
watching all that and getting introduced to the whole scene.
Yeah. So I was just going to ask, how did you deal with those situations at that time?
Um,
Like losing, like watching someone incredibly important to you. Now, if this isn't something you want to talk about, like,
no, no,
I totally understand. But if you're willing to, how did you deal with like watching your mom? Like what was, I know it's not what you would do probably today, but how did you deal with that then?
well, I was introduced to narcotics, and that's
Yeah,
when
so I started getting high.
yeah, I started getting high, and
Okay.
that's when all the pain kind of, just eased a little bit from everything I was going through at that time.
Yeah. So I learned that I can escape through numbing out or fucking getting high, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. Was that the same way you learned to deal with the hard parts of your brother?
Basically, I do imagine though how life would be if I wouldn't have never went through any of that stuff, and because as she was saying that I think we're intended to be brave people
Mhm.
and confident, and but once I was introduced to addiction, I feel like I lost all that.
Okay.
And so sometimes I do think about life and how it would be if I would have never went through those situations and how it would have played out for me. But
Okay. So
yeah,
would have I been a different person if I wouldn't have gone down the path that I've gone down?
yeah. Or would I have the self-esteem that I want, or would I made it to be the person that I'm trying to become today a long time ago? I don't know.
Okay. So, well, I mean, I want to keep an idea what we're talking about. Like you learned to stay, internalized. I learned to check out. You learned to run to a substance, which I also did,
Yeah.
as a way to deal with my problems. Like now, of all of those behaviors that we talked about, staying within yourself, using, checking out, how long did those, like what I mean is like those situations probably stopped, you know, but those behaviors stuck with us for the long term. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The
So,
habits.
yeah, and the
Yeah.
habits, the
Yeah.
ways we learn to deal with the world. So what we're talking about here, right sizing my space in the world is very similar to this. It's also an adaptation to all of these experiences, so, I became really big, I became really small, I became a perfectionist, I became, whatever version of this I became, you know, is a way to deal with the insecurity behind that insecurity is some sort of fear that I've had of it, the experiences that I've had, and then they just became part of who I am.
Yeah, and like it's crazy. Like we don't even like I talk to so many people in recovery who, we have all these suggestions in recovery of like make healthy friends and go to meetings and like make boundaries and all this stuff. And they're really like big changes for us, but I hear all the time people who don't want to take the suggestions saying like that's just not who I am. And I find it really interesting because I think, like, for instance, some women like recovering from being incarcerated, they don't want to, that I know, they don't want to make friends. They don't want to go to meetings. They don't want to do social things. They barely want to leave where they're at. And they'll be like, well, that's just not who I am. And I'm like, that's so wild because I wonder if that's who you were when you were 5 years old. I know that's not who you are today, but that's because like all the behaviors and events that have created who you are today. Like, of course, like you've been isolated for 8 years with a bunch of people you couldn't trust. So like I don't think that's their authentic self. I think the authenticity is to connect with people. We're like social creatures. Um, but like they literally think this, no, that's not who I am because of they've been put in isolation for so long and stuff like that. Like that's literally we think that's our personality. Like, oh, that's just not who I am. Like, well, today, because of everything that's happened to you, is that who you actually is that true for you, or is that coming from a place of insecurity and fear?
Yeah, challenging the way that I'm showing up. Like thinking about this, like all of that shit was super helpful at a stage of my life. But the reality is that's not who I am today. Like when we're talking about using,
Yeah.
you know, using worked really. I mean, I'm not saying this to encourage anybody to continue it, but like using does something for us. It achieves a mission, it accomplishes a goal. It helps us deal with certain shit that we don't know how else to deal with at that time.
Yeah.
But now getting to a place where we can actually look at who do I want to be today? Do I want to be somebody different? Like we were talking about this, before this started, is who do I want to be now? What are things that matter to me now? I mean, in the programs, they talk about spiritual principles. What is that?
Mm-hmm.
What is a spiritual principle to you? Like, what's your take on the spiritual principle? What does that mean to you?
I guess honest, um, spiritual principles or people that I would like to be around, and people that are make me feel important, or people that I could trust, I guess, people that I could count on, and people that I would like to vision me to be in one day as well. Somebody that will encourage me and inspire me. I don't really know much about.
Okay. Okay. I mean, I'm asking because a lot of people do. Like, I didn't know. I thought like the skies would part and beams of light would shoot out of the clouds, and I'd be bestowed with some crazy ass piece of wisdom that I
Yeah,
didn't know. At least, what are spiritual principles to you?
It's interesting because it's a lot of behaving in my authentic selfness. Like, for instance, so if I was really brave
Living
when I
in
was
your authentic
5,
selfness.
yeah, so like
Okay,
when
go
I
ahead.
was 5 years old and I was really brave, then all this shit happened. And oh, I could have told you in addiction, I'm not scared of shit just because I could walk out of a store with a bunch of stolen merchandise. But that was just like the insanity of, well, what I was seeking from that substance was taking away fear. It wasn't real, but it felt pretty superhuman.
Yeah.
And recovery is like, okay, you don't have the fake shit anymore. How do you find courage today? So, like, how do I get back to my authentic self? So, like, courage is a huge, hugely important spiritual principle for me. It's like it's the spiritual principle smear. It's like the guidebook to getting, a lot of people say this, think of the steps as like, oh, I'm trying to become a better person. And I see it backwards. I see it, you've always been this great person. The steps are helping you to see that and find that again. There's nothing wrong with you. The problem is all the shit that has built up over you, all the insecurity, all the fear. You're learning how to take that away and get back to like who you would be without fear, trauma, loss, pain.
So getting back to your authentic self is a spiritual principle. Okay. I mean, to me, I'm not saying this right, but the only way I can look at it now is spiritual principles is what I like in you. The kindness, the giving, the humility, the honesty, the integrity, the respect, the, I don't know, humor, clarity. It's basically what I like in the people that I respect. And so, how do I actually live my life guided by those things, knowing they're going to be different for every single individual? You know, things that matter to me. Like if you had to pick a list of things that were your top three list of things that are hands down the most important things that have gotten you to where you are in your recovery to date, what would they be?
For me,
Yeah.
um, I guess a spiritual awakening, the loss of my brother what kind of woke me up.
Okay.
Yeah, and and that was like one big thing, and when I witnessed that, when I went through that tragedy, I kind of snapped. And
Okay.
yeah,
What are some other things that well there's the experiences that drove us to where we are now, you
yeah.
know, but then there's things that if you look at what has helped you get to the stage of your recovery that you are right now more than anything, like what aspects have helped you become the person you want to become?
I guess watching other people, achieve goals, they've been in the same situation where I was in, and they overcame, you know, addiction and got to places that I would like to be.
Okay, so it's the inspiration of watching other people
Yeah,
achieve goals that gave you some motivation to do the same thing.
exactly.
Okay. Elise, what
Oh,
about you?
yeah.
Hope?
Well, that's what I was hearing from what
Yeah.
Marcus was saying.
Okay, hope, yeah. Hope that things can be better,
Yeah.
optimism that things.
I'm on the bravery kick. I think that's a big one because I used it for every level of my recovery, like not picking up, walking into a meeting, asking someone to sponsor me. All of these things like took courage. They are not, you know, things that I would have done out of the insecurity that I was in that moment. And then that's also a big part of the goals and dreams, like all the spiritual principles that I looked at in the seventh step, that to me, well, courage was a huge one. And it was like, how do I counteract that stuff? How do I counteract the fear I have of connecting, of showing up as my authentic self, of doing things I love when there's all that insecurity around it? Well, I have to practice courage. And it's not easy, Like I would show up to the dance studio that I hadn't been to in a decade because of using, and it felt super icky because all that insecurity, I was feeling it all, right? I'd walk out, I'd cry my way home, drive home crying, go back, do it the next week. Like it's not like courage, bravery to me is like you're not waiting to feel that, you're acting as if so that you can practice it.
Acting as if you're brave until you actually feel it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Like acting your way into better thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, God, things that were most important to me. Humility, I think, was a huge one. Well, honesty would be very much top of the list. Like finally getting honest with what the hell the reality of my situation was.
Yeah.
Like I would never admit that I was an addict. I remember sitting in jail once and being like, well, how the fuck are you ever going to figure out a solution to a problem if you can't even talk about the problem?
Yeah.
You know?
Big one.
And to going through and looking at honesty, I mean, humility probably would be second in there. You know, I'm very much back to the original idea we're talking about of right sizing my space in the world. I was very much the fucking big ego or big personality in the room, you know, trying to overcompensate for the facts that I just generally thought I was a piece of shit most of my life. And I didn't want anybody to see that. Um, and I think being grateful for what I have today matters. Like I always thought gratitude would come when I got the thing or the stuff or the car or the money or the whatever. If I get that stuff, then I'll be grateful. But the reality is, you know, at least and for me, I've come to find that being grateful for what I have actually changes my life, you know, in ways that I can't anticipate to be able to go through things differently.
Yeah. We're as addicts, we're very used to like feeling a certain way to do anything, and recovery is the opposite. Like you feel like shit, it doesn't matter. You do the right thing anyways, and then you do feel better. You know, it's very backwards. It's a difficult concept to get around. But spiritual principles are really just action words. You know, like how can I practice? How can I be courageous? How can I get honest today? How can I be open-minded to a new perspective? Like that's why they call it work.
Yeah.
Right?
I got to put in the work to do these. I mean, and then I mean, I like the idea that they're kind of like the guides to my life. That am I doing shit in alignment with who I want to be today? You know, in the book we had this tool called the decision filter, which when I was brand new in recovery, I needed, which was like, how do I, you know, my decision making ability sucked, you know, because I make really decisions not in alignment with who I want to be, you know. So I'd ask myself three questions: is this honestly good for me? You know, do we need to get into what honestly means? But can I look myself in the mirror and be like, yeah, it is actually good for me, not me talking myself into some version of bullshit. You know, is this good for my recovery? You know, is this actually really good for my recovery? And does this keep me in line with my goals? You know, so if it's honestly good for me, is this good for my recovery? And does this keep me in line with my goals? If I couldn't say yes to all three of those, don't fucking do it. Was the simplest way I can put it. And it was really helpful to start looking at, you know, having these little mechanisms that I could use, typed it out and made that a screensaver on my phone. So every time I looked at it, it became ingrained into what I was trying to think about questions I want to ask myself on a regular basis so I can start making decisions in alignment with the life I'm trying to live.
Yeah, and the goals, that's an interesting one, right? Because like when we come in with this blanket of insecurity, and as we're shedding it with working on our recovery, we make room to figure out who we are and what we want. Like I could have told you, you know, like if someone was like, do you want to be a professional dancer now? At least at like 6 months clean, I would have been like, I feel like I lost out on that chance. I'm not good enough, and I'm too old, and I wouldn't even know how to start. How would I gonna make money that way? Like all these things based out of insecurity. Like I will literally think I don't like something because of how insecure I am of something. Like when I have to dance freestyle today, like I want to throw up, and my insecurity tells me run, and I do it anyways. And the more I do it, the more comfortable I feel, and the more I realize, man, I really do like this. I have just so much insecurity that it tells me that, nah, don't do it. Nah, you don't like this. Nah, because of the uncomfortableness of moving through the insecurity. Like, I will literally think I don't like stuff because of my insecurity. It's wild.
Yeah. Keep me safe. What are some goals you've got going on right now?
Some goals.
Yeah.
Education. I made a commitment to education that I could take the next 5 years of my life and become something, that's and another goal, is to restore my relationships, that I lost in the past, and then the last commitment, I guess, was to get healthy, to get because in the beginning of recovery, I ate a lot and I got overweight, and then that had a lot of insecurity towards myself, and I didn't feel good, and I didn't have any confidence, and that caused a lot of stress in my life, so my last goal that I made was to get in shape and to get healthy and to get be an active member of a gym, and to I don't want to be insecure, and I don't want fear to run my life. So I think by making that goal that and following through with it, I'll feel a lot better about myself.
For sure. I
Yeah.
mean, that's kind of the antidote to this right sizing my space in the world is, great. So we define the criteria of it. I was really big, I was really small. That was based on insecurity. Insecurity came from my fear. My fear came from all of those experiences. Well, great. Now that we know that, well, how do you upend that?
Exactly.
How do I start creating new experiences that I'm not saying everybody's going to be successful all the time, but if I start to set goals that I can actually achieve, like education, towards health, towards dance, towards your recovery, towards whatever it is, then if I'm living in alignment with spiritual principles that I want to live by, then those goals and aspirations actually become accomplishments, which are essentially my new experiences. And those new experiences can create security towards what I'm doing, which will actually help me, create a new dynamic to what I'm doing and right size my space in the world. I don't have to be little. I also don't have to be the biggest thing in the world, but I can start living in alignment with who I want to be to actually get to the place where at the end of the day, I like the person looking back at me in the mirror. I can start to have a different experience.
Yeah.
If that makes
And realizing that's internal. Like, um, I'm not going to feel secure if all I'm doing is trying to make more money, have more possessions, look really good on the outside. I will still be insecure.
Mhm.
It has nothing to do with the external stuff, um, because it's the feeling. And so, like, that is why working on recovery. I mean, I see a lot of people do this where they're focused on all the external shit and then they go back and they're like, what happened? It's spiritual to me is like it's all this stuff inside. It's like I had a higher power it was using and now I need a new one. And whatever that is, it's got to be positive, you know, and it's not external stuff. It's like being of service and doing steps, counseling and therapy, shedding the blanket of insecurity and all going through all those fears and finding new solutions. Like that's what's important because I could, I'll use my dad as an example. I could make 200 grand a year and still feel like ending my life. Like it's not um you can do all the outside stuff, it doesn't change what's going on in here, And so I feel like that um, you know, like I have to be able to be like okay with me, whether I have the job or I get fired, whether I have the car or not. I should have just as much like faith in myself and others and the universe, whether I'm living in my car or I'm living in a mansion. Like that's security to me. That's recovery.
Yeah, and so cool. I really appreciate this conversation today. I mean, obviously, kind of recap these things of what you're taking away. So, what was the biggest thing you took away from this conversation that was important to you today? What
Um,
stands out to you more than anything else?
that that recovery, that focusing on our recovery could get us to overcome our insecurity, and to find out where we belong in life, I guess, and where we're headed, and what we need to follow through with to let us thrive for that, I guess.
Yeah, I like that. Elise, what was it for you? What stood out to you today more than anything?
I love these giant ideas, and then I also have to be like, what does that mean for me today? Um, so like keeping this vision in mind, and then on the day to day, like I like starting my morning with like prayer meditation steps. Like I make sure that like the inner work is always first, and then the rest happens. And so this is just a reminder to me of like that as long as I keep doing that, I am secure.
I love that. I mean, one that stood out to me is just the reality that I don't have to be who I am today doesn't have to be defined by who I once was.
Hmm.
And that every single experience I had in my past may have gotten me to where I was, but it doesn't have to be who I am now. And the fact of reality is that none of us are our past. We don't have to be defined by any of the experiences of who we once were. So cool. I really appreciate you guys. If you guys find this useful out in the world, be sure to share this with somebody that matters to you, because the reality is none of us are alone in these experiences. So if it helped you, maybe it'll help somebody else. You can find that at Choice Recovery Path on YouTube. And thank you guys so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, good shit.
Good,
Bye.
good shit.
Bye.
See ya.
All information and other content supplied or communicated in or through this video is for general informational purposes only and does not or nor is intended to constitute legal or medical advice. Any viewer of this video should contact his or her own attorney, doctor, or other applicable advisor or practitioner to obtain legal, medical, or other applicable advice with respect to the accuracy, reliability, or potential application to such viewer of any matter discussed or portrayed in this video. Please do not act or refrain from acting in any way based on any information or content supplied or communicated in or through this video. The views expressed during this video are those of the individual presenters only and not those of Choice Recovery Path LLC or any of its customers, suppliers, or affiliates. Any liability with respect to actions taken or not taken by any viewer based on any information or content supplied or communicated in or through such video is hereby expressly disclaimed. All such information or content is expressly provided as is and free of any representation or warranty of any kind.